Hey, welcome to Brighter Rays. This is a study on Genesis chapter 21, 1 through 21. And we call this the promised laughter because it's talking about, finally, Isaac, the birth of Isaac, the long-awaited laughter that was promised. And in verses 1 through 7, we're going to see that God always fulfills His promises. The text tells us how the birth of Isaac came about. He was born just as God had promised. Abraham was obedient to God and circumcised his son on the 8th day, naming him Isaac, or laughter, as God had said. Sarah declares that God had made laughter for her and that all that would hear that she had a baby in her old age would laugh as well. Who would have thought this could happen? The birth of Isaac not only fulfilled God's promise to Abraham, but taught Abraham many great spiritual truths, right? I mean, think about this covenant, this promises that God made with Abraham really just formed the last 25 years of his life. It directed it. It taught him all about who God was. It taught him about, first of all, the nature of God. So we see that God is not in a rush to get things done like we are. Abraham had to learn that, right? Because he went and had that relationship with Hagar because he thought, well, it's promises here, just move things along, right? Give God a little push, give this covenant a little kickstart. But that didn't work out. That's not how God wanted to do things. That was not in God's timing. So, I mean, think about it. For a timeless being like God is, time does not constrain Him or time does not concern Him. We need to think this way too about our lives, about how our lives are playing out. Isaiah 28:16 says, "Therefore, thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am the one who has laid as a foundation in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone of a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not be in haste." So God says there is like, here, Jesus, He's talking about Christ, the cornerstone. I'm laying this stone, but whoever believes in this is not in a hurry, because the promise is coming. The promise is sure. The promise is not going away. It might not happen as fast as you want it to, but it's God. God has His own time. It may not happen as quickly as you think it should, but if you're a believer, you're not in haste. You don't need to worry about what's happening because you know what the future is. It's eternal. So what is 25 years compared to, a bazillion? It's nothing. All right, so Abraham has to learn that about God, is that God is not in a hurry like we are. He's not constrained by time. There's no time frame. It doesn't matter the maturity level or the age of Sarah and Abraham either. Second thing that they learn is that God is omnipotent. Abraham was old and Sarah was past the age of childbearing and was barren. The actions of pagan kings and Abraham and Sarah themselves cannot stop God. Nothing is too difficult for God. And with Him, all things are possible. Right? So no matter what they did, God was going to unfold this plan. He had the plan before the foundation of the world. It's a plan that was created outside of time. And so you can't thwart that. You can't change that. You can't break that. Even though the sinful actions of people were involved there, even though they go against God's declarative will, like, I don't want you to be liars, don't bear false testimony. But yet Abraham did that, but God used that. God used that even to turn it around to bless him. So, it's amazing to see how God does that. But that's one of the things you had to learn about God. God is all powerful. Nothing's going to stop Him. You can try, but you're not going to succeed. Because even when you try, that trying to thwart Him is already in His plan, and He's already got that worked into His plan. And so you can't stop Him. What He's declared, what He has decreed, what He has said, what He has in His mind will come to pass. That's just how it is. Third thing that Abraham had to learn is that God is faithful to His word. God said that Sarah would have a son at a certain time. He said, I'll come back next time. I'll come back later on this time next year, and we're going to have a son. What happened? Sarah had a son at that certain time, right? So if God says that's going to happen, it's going to happen. He is faithful to his word. Nothing, when he says things in his word, those things are going to happen. Those promises that he made, those warnings that he gave, those all come to pass. You can't stop that. You can't change that. You can't avoid that either. So another thing that Abraham and Sarah had to learn. Fourthly, God has made everything for a specific time. There's no such thing as chance. God's plans are not contingent on the actions of people. We see God saying in chapters 17, 18, and 21 that Sarah would have Isaac at a set or appointed time. Can never go outside the plan of God. He might rebel against his character, his will, but even the rebellious acts of men are in the plan of God. So you see that, even all that stuff that's happened in those 3 chapters, God said, you're going to have an Isaac, and that Isaac is coming at this time. And this before ultrasounds and everything, so they didn't know they were going to have a boy, but God told me, you're going to have a boy, you're going to name him Isaac, this is what's going to happen, it's going to happen at this time. And that's exactly what happened. So you can never go outside the plan of God. And sometimes, you went outside the plan of God. Some people say that, well, no, you can't do that. God's plan is what this reality is. I was planned to do this video, but doesn't mean that everything's good and everything's great and everything is holy. It just means that God has this plan of how everything's going to work out, and it does. So that's the nature of God. That's who God is. And so we need to take that into account, that's what this story really is about, the coming of Isaac, Isaac being born. You see that. Boom, here he is. Now, let's take a moment to think about the birth of Isaac and how it foreshadowed the birth of Christ. God created this whole scenario to teach God's people and prepare them for the coming of the one son. First, Isaac and Jesus were children of God's promise, right? Remember Isaiah 7:14? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Second, there was a long passage of time between the promise and its fulfillment. The people were to wait to see the promise come true. Right? They had to wait. The promise of Jesus coming took a while. The promise of Isaac took a while. Third, both births were miraculous. Isaac came from a woman that was too old to have children. Right? She went through menopause. She was no longer able to have children anymore. And then for Mary, she was a virgin. Both of them shouldn't be able to conceive, right? But that's what happened. Miraculous birth. Fourth, both Sarah and Mary asked a question. How could this be? When they were told of their impending birth. Both received an answer, confirming the almighty power of God. With God, it's not impossible. They're both like, well, how could this happen? Because of the situation I'm in right now. And they're like, with God, all things are possible, so don't worry about it. That's how it is. This is what he's going to do. So, you're going to have to deal with it, but this is what's going to happen. All right, the fifth thing is, we go back to the idea of time here. Isaac was born at the set time, right? God said, you're going to have Isaac, he's going to be born at this time, boom. What happens with Jesus, right? Jesus was born in the fullness of time, as Paul says in Galatians 4:4. So both were promised to come at a certain time. You look at the prophecies concerning the Messiah coming, he came right on time. Number 6, both of their names, their gender, and some of who they would be were announced before they were even conceived. So who Jesus would be, who he was, his gender, and they said he'll have a boy and you will name him this. That's exactly what happened with Isaac, right? So we see those parallels there of just the announcement of who this child would be before this child was even conceived, before this child even came into existence. What they were going to do, who they were going to be, was kind of already foretold. Number 7, Isaac was the laughter, the joy of Abraham. The laughter of Abraham, right? God the Father said of his Son, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. This is my joy. This is my laughter." And so you see this kind of, here's Isaac, this precious child, this apple of his father's eye, and then you have Jesus, who is the same. And so you see the story of Abraham and Isaac, the father and son story. And we'll get to a lot more of this when we get to the sacrifice of Isaac, and we see the sacrifice of Christ in that story. But you see those parallels there, because God is not a fool. He knows that we need to be taught over and over again. We need explanations. We need all these things to make us understand. And so when we read in the Old Testament of how Isaac's birth came about, and then we read in the New Testament about how Jesus' birth came about, we're reading like, wow, I've recognized this. I've seen this somewhere else before. And you should. And it'd be interesting, on the road to Damascus, on the road to Emmaus, not Damascus, road to Emmaus, that's a different road. The road to Emmaus, where Jesus is walking along with his disciples and explaining to them all the things that were about him in the Old Testament, that long Bible study as they walked that road. He had to go to Abraham and Isaac and say, here, this was about me. Yeah, it's about Abraham, Isaac, but ultimately it's about me. See, there's me. So that would have been cool to see. But that's all those things that, those parallels there, that it's priming the minds of God's people to say, hey, I've seen this before. I recognize this before. Something's going down here. God has promised that with Isaac and Abraham. So something's happening here. And that should have, made the people think, and it should make us think as well. And when we see those parallels, when we see those kind of, here is the shadow, and then here is the fulfillment over on the other side, it should make us pause and think and connect those together and see, wow, God had a plan, and the plan was the coming of Christ. And he woven that story, it's woven within the fabric of time. Pretty amazing to see once you begin to see that. So come back next time and we'll look at the next section, verses 8 through 21, where we're going to talk about how God's loving choice of us separates us from the world and a lot of other things. So come back next time.